Amazing. Let's go ahead and dive on in. So today's webinar is going to be centered around how HealthMatch was able to successfully use Customer IO and Rudderstack to launch a new business model in under 24 hours. So to that end, real quick, just setting the agenda, we're going to run through introductions really quickly. From there, we're going to actually dive into that customer story of what sort of challenges were HealthMatch facing and how were they able to solve those. From there, we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing and learning about Customer IO and Rudderstack as a solution. And then finally, we're going to spend about 10 minutes in a Q&A session. Please feel free to post your questions as we go along inside the chat, and we'll do our best to attend to those at the end. So first off, I just want to kick things off by starting off with some introductions with who we're joined with. First off, we have Joel Pinkham joining us from HealthMatch. We have Cody Stover, who is joining us from Customer IO. And then I myself am Mike Oftanomov, and I am from Rudderstack. So from there, we're just going to pass things over to Joel to learn a little bit more about some background. Who is HealthMatch as an organization?
Hey everyone, I hope everyone's going well today. I will jump in and tell you a little bit about our story. One little caveat, I've been struggling with a cold all week, so excuse me if I have to pause and cough for a couple of times, but I'll do my best. So we are a startup that connects patients with clinical trials. So we started in 2017. We're based in Sydney, Australia. It's very early in the morning for me, and most of our users are in the US. So on one side, we have people who are living with a medical condition who are looking for an alternative, but still want something science-based. What we do, we have a crawler that basically brings in all of the world's clinical trials available on government registries and maps it into a patient-friendly questionnaire on our website. On the other side of the equation, we work with research sites and pharma companies to actually connect those patients directly into the clinics where they're running the clinical trials.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that, Joel. Up next, we want to talk a little bit further about some of the challenges that your organization was facing.
Yeah, so it was back in 2021. I just joined the company. We were very, very optimistic about our future and had really aggressive growth goals for 2021. We wanted to go from 100,000 users to 1 million users over the year. And our current tech stack, in terms of like how we looked at analytics and trigger-based marketing and things like that, was pretty basic. So we had Google Analytics and SendGrid with no customer data platform. So it was a pretty basic setup that we had. We wanted something that could scale with the user base, but also be really, really flexible to deal with complex scenarios of how do you send messages to 1 million people in really targeted specific medical situations that we may not have even come up with at that stage when we were just in the infancy of the business. So we wanted something that could be really flexible as we scaled. It had to be HIPAA compliant. So dealing with medical data, I don't know if anybody works in health tech here, but dealing with medical data is like a totally different world than dealing with regular consumer or B2B SaaS data. You've got to be really, really careful with what you store. And for us, we needed something that we could either host ourselves or could had HIPAA compliance where we could sign a business agreement with the provider. We had a really short time window. We wanted to get something up and running quickly. We had a specific use case that we were planning in our product roadmap that needed some flexibility around emails, and we didn't want to have to kind of build a custom solution for that. We wanted to invest in the system, so we needed something we could get off the ground running, get up and running quickly. And yeah, like for me, I'm a big believer in focusing engineers in your actual core product on something that only they can do. So I was really concerned about having something that was going to take away a lot of engineering effort to implement. So these are some of the challenges that led us to our exploration of tools in the space that we're talking about today.
Thanks so much for that, Joel. And so now we're going to dive a little bit more into how did you solve some of those problems. So first, would you mind outlining for us, what did your day-to-day look like when you were using HubSpot and Google Analytics? And how did that stand in contrast to after you had implemented customer IO and Rudderstack?
I mean, basically, we just weren't doing much. Like, I didn't really bother. Like, I didn't dive into the product analytics as nearly as much as I do now, or I have in past jobs, just because the fidelity of data wasn't amazing. And then in terms of our communicating with customers, we were pretty, like, again, we had transactional emails set up, but we were pretty basic in terms of, like, we would do a manual data export from our BI tool, upload it into SendGrid to do custom manual send. So so we're in a pretty basic situation.
Yeah. And then would you mind outlining for us, what did implementation look like? And then more to the point, how was your team able to implement so quickly?
So I think it really helped, firstly, that we were quite small and we decided this was our top priority at the time. So between myself and our CTO, we evaluated tools together, and we actually spent, so it kind of made that decision quite quickly. And then because he had been involved the whole way, we could spec it out. And I think we pulled in one more engineer to roll out the tools in about a week together. So we just kind of threw out a bit of process and just got it done. Everybody knew what they needed to do.
Yeah, that's an amazing implementation time. So more specifically to Rudderstack, how are you using event streaming today, as well as reverse ETL?
Yeah, so we started out with a pretty basic use case of both Rudderstack and Customer IO, but it's just gotten, like, every month or so we'll be adding some extra bit of functionality. So what it looks like today, we have all of our product data, both backend and front end, pushing into Rudderstack, going into Customer IO, and we have Customer IO streaming events back into Rudderstack, which then feeds them into things like Amplitude. So we have one central view and Amplitude of all that activity. And we also use the reverse ETL to push all of the relevant data into HubSpot, our CRM.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then lastly, what's the general sentiment of your team towards Rudderstack and Customer IO?
Yeah, so everybody's a pretty big fan, and we have pretty good knowledge around the company of it from the engineering team. They really love that they just have to do one little event implementation, because they've set up the code in a way where it's a lot of the hard work's been done, so they just have to do a really quick add-on when they're adding a new event. And then, yeah, with the rest of the team, like, everything's just been super easy to learn for everyone.
That's great to hear. Great. So now that we've discussed the solution, I would love to dive a little bit more into the results. So to that end, would you mind describing this new business model that you launched?
Yeah, can do. And I'll give a little bit of context to the situation. So like most startups who had to fundraise this year, guessing a few other people on this call have been in a situation in a pretty tight financial market where VC appetite has changed significantly. We were fundraising. We weren't making revenue earlier this year. We were focused on user growth. And yeah, middle of our fundraising, it was very clear we need to, we can't promise a business model. We've got to prove a business model quite quickly. So we had a few different ideas, and one of the people we had been speaking to had a specific trial we wanted to see if we could work on, where we were trying to connect existing people within our database to that specific trial. And because of what we had already set up with Rudderstack and Customer IO in terms of all the event data feeding through, it basically meant we could try something immediately. So what this new business model looks like is that either a pharma company, which we call a sponsor, or we work with networks of research clinics. They'll come to us and say, we need X number of patients for this trial. We'll go to our database. So we have a database of about 1.1 million patients who have completed a medical profile. Our matching algorithm will identify, of those 1 million people, how many of those people are potentially eligible for this trial based on the medical profile they've provided in the past, and then who's within the distance of those people. So we can get really, really targeted. So for example, narrow that 1 million down to 30,000 who are actually relevant. Because we're, again, like I said, because we've done a lot of that hard work, like the algorithm pushes the results of that directly to Rudderstack, which goes into Customer.io. And then it allowed us to send an email, really simple email, just like, you have a new match waiting for you. Check your eligibility. And we sent an email and SMS through Customer.io, and yeah, managed to drive enough referrals through to those research sites to end up with 130K revenue from that very first customer we did with this.
Yeah,
and now like we've done that for about 15 or 20 people.
That's amazing. Great results in such a short timeline. And in terms of, let's say after you had implemented Customer.io and Rudderstack, can you walk us through the process of rolling out a new CRM?
Yeah, so we had historically used Salesforce, which we got rid of because we weren't really using it anymore. But suddenly when you have to make a business model and start making money again, very quickly we were like, okay, we need to actually manage our sales process. We need to be good at this. And yeah, we needed a tool to start running with that. We're very, very data driven in terms of who we target in customers we're going after. So for example, we do every medical condition on Health Match, but we're really only focused on a few medical conditions currently where we know we do really well. So depression and diabetes, for example. And so we need to be able to identify which clinics, which pharma companies have we had a lot of success with in the past in connecting patients through to. We need to be able to have this accessible in a CRM so we can then target the outreach and empower the BD team to do that. So when we got a CRM, one of the first requirements was that it actually can work with Rudderstack, so we wouldn't have to build any of that integration ourselves. We chose HubSpot, implemented the first version in a couple of days. It's pretty easy to set up. But the best part was connecting our data through from, collecting things from a mix of our tools. So bringing in event data around last active in our software product, bringing in core data from our production database, anything in our warehouse, wrote a few queries, and with reverse ETL, that pushes up to HubSpot every 30 minutes. So, without an engineer, just me chugging away for half a day, got the integration done to have all of our data flowing into HubSpot.
Awesome, thanks. And then can you describe or give a little more detail on how that optimized alerting process works when using Customer.io and Rudderstack?
Yeah, so with this new business model, it's all about identifying really relevant people who might be suitable for a clinical trial, notifying them about that match, and then helping them get through the questionnaire, giving them the information necessary to make a decision if they want to apply to that study or not, and then actually processing that through. So when we first did this, I think we're going to go into the specific technical details of how we did this a bit later. When we first did this, we saw a bunch of drop-off points. Like every funnel has drop-off points. It doesn't matter if it's e-commerce or the patient clinical trial matching application funnel like we're working on. And so we because we had, again, all the data infrastructure was done, we do our first campaign. We can build a report in Amplitude, which covers both Customer.io events and our website events, and that's just all there. We didn't have to build anything new. It allowed us to identify a number of spots in the funnel that we optimized. The first one we did was about a 40% drop off from click to actually starting the questionnaire because you had to log in, and that was one thing that we could zero in on and try to spend some time on with implementing something in Customer.io, and we'll get into that a bit later.
Awesome. And then you touched on this earlier, but can you be a little more explicit or share some more details on after you implemented Customer IO and Rudderstack, were you able to free up resources for your employees to work on other projects? And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah, the biggest benefit was definitely felt in the engineering team. So like between growth and product, anything we could think of, we could, like after we did the initial setup, anything we could think of, we could do ourselves. You know, so I think like the number of sprints where you would need an engineer to help achieve something, for sending an email a certain way or tracking or like getting a report in a certain way, was very minimal compared to before. So like massive free up of engineering resources, just because growth and product didn't have to bother them, could do it ourselves.
Yeah, appreciate it. And not inconsistent with what we hear from many other customers. Last question I wanted to ask was, what sort of advice would you give to peers in your industry in terms of if they're looking to implement a CDP and marketing automation solution?
I'd say industry leaders and most expensive is not necessarily best. Like I've used a number of tools in different jobs, and it's very easy. And I did this, I was guilty of this in my last job, very easy to use what you used in your last company each time. And I was guilty of this before. So I think it was like actually taking the time to go, what is the best solution on the market today? Because what's the best solution today is very different to what it was 2 years ago in this space.
Totally. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that, Joel. That covers everything that I wanted to discuss in terms of the results that you were able to realize. From here, I'd love to go ahead and dive on into learning a little bit more about Customer IO as well as Rudderstack. So to that end, Cody, I'd love to hand things over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. And Joel, thanks for kind of walking through the detail. I think like I'm thinking when I'm a viewer on these type of webinars, I'm always wondering, how do people make their tech stack work for them or work for whatever their business is asking of them? So yeah, I appreciate you kind of sharing the ins and outs. And I actually want to go a little deeper, as you kind of preface there, little spoiler, to one of the use cases on the drop-off rate you were seeing. And then we can talk a little bit more about how Customer IO actually worked, or how you actually put that use case together. First off, folks in the crowd, maybe if you haven't met Customer IO before, or haven't heard of our platform or used it, I can give just kind of a quick intro, but we're essentially a cross-channel customer engagement platform that allows you to consolidate transactional messages, product-triggered messages, marketing messages, newsletters, pretty much any kind of message you can consolidate into our platform and be able to kind of build those workflows inside of Customer IO. On the flip side of that, you can do a lot with data automations too. So just as you're building out messaging flows that adapt and react to what your users are doing, you can do the same stuff using webhooks to kind of, sometimes people actually replace a lot of what they're doing in Zapier by bringing that into Customer IO as well. So you can kind of, for example, one example that people use a lot is maybe you want to create a round robin for your sales team to update the CRM with an assignment of who gets this lead when it comes into your application. Or maybe you want to trigger a Slack message when somebody shows signs of churn. So along with building out all your messaging, you can also build out a lot of that marketing style infrastructure too inside of Customer IO. So that the next slide, I'll give us some more detail, but actually stay here real quick, Mike. The logos there on the side, you can see we work with a ton of different industries. So folks like Billy in the kind of subscription box businesses, EdTech, DataCamp's one customer that we work with there. In the SaaS space, Notion, there's lots of good product-led growth kind of applications to Customer IO. So lots of customers with a similar model there. Fintechs like Lemonade. And of course, Health Match. Joel, we're a pleasure to work with you, but I also know you mentioned HIPAA compliance is a big thing that matters. So anybody else in the health and wellness space in the audience today, Rudderstack and Customer IO, both HIPAA compliant, and definitely a space that we love working with customers in to make sure that you can do all this cool data-driven stuff, but you're also staying super compliant the whole time. So taking one step deeper here on this next slide, you're probably like, all right, that's a good overview, but like, where does Customer IO actually sit in the tech stack? So this kind of gives a simplified view of it, but the heart and soul of Customer IO is actually what the data that you're trying to use to engage your customers with. So that starts kind of on the left-hand side there. If we actually start from the bottom, for example, Rudderstack, integrating a CDP into Customer.io, bringing in all of that product usage data or data that you're sending in. And then you can also integrate straight from your mobile and web applications. You can bring in forms, stuff from your website, like a page view. Maybe somebody views your cancellation page, and that's actually a big churn risk sign. Bring all of that data into Customer.io, and then you're kind of able to, there on the right side, as we see, build out kind of those messaging flows and data automations to do what you need to actually do with that data. So the next slide, going one step further, if you're actually the practitioner in Customer.io, this is probably where you live inside of our visual workflow builder. So all the stuff that I've been prefacing in the last couple slides, this is kind of where the rubber hits the road, and you actually hop in to a blank canvas and kind of build out exactly the messaging flow that you want. So as you can see there on the left, we've got messages, email push, SMS. I didn't mention in-app before, but we actually launched in-app messaging as a native feature a couple months ago. One cool stat from that is we're actually seeing in-app as a channel as a whole is converting about 2 times higher than email. So I think in certain use cases, that's a really interesting way to kind of sync up your email and your SMS with stuff that's actually alerts and notifications inside your app. But you can build that all out kind of custom to what your business needs here in this workflow builder. And one thing just to note too, like this is all based on your application's data. So this screenshot is just a screenshot of an example campaign, but you can kind of define that trigger there as you see at the start, and then build these branching campaigns. Did they finish their account setup? If they did, cool. Let's send them another message to keep them going. If they didn't, let's follow up differently. So kind of the world's your oyster as you get in there and build stuff out on both a messaging level and a data level. All right, so that's kind of the overview of Customer.io. And I think just, Joel, to give the audience a little bit more flavor, I want to dig into a couple of different use cases, one with messaging and one with data on these next couple slides. But audience too, feel free to join in the chat and ask some questions as we go, because I think if you have relevant questions to what we're going through, we definitely want to address them on the fly and talk to them. So chime in and we'll definitely try to answer those now or at the end too. But Joel, let's start with kind of the lifecycle messaging use case of Customer.io. So I know you prefaced earlier, there was a part of your funnel where you kind of were seeing a 40% drop off at a certain point. Talk to me through a little bit about that situation, and then give the audience some details on kind of how you use Customer.io to engage at that point.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is not a unique problem to us, but clicking from an email, forcing a user to log in, you're always going to see drop off. It's just any friction you add to that. It's just simple. So yeah, we were seeing a 40% drop off from clicking on the email to completing login. One of the things we had often talked about in the product team was, you know, how do we cut out that step? And it wasn't a huge problem because we weren't relying on those emails being successful for our business model at the time. So we kind of swept it under the rug and kept on going with our other priorities. But as soon as we launched this new business model, that drop off was essentially a 40% drop off in potential revenue. So it became a much bigger important problem for us to look at. The thing that we're often concerned about, again with health tech and when you're dealing with patient data, you're going to be really security conscious. Like, you know, little things like we can't expose anything about the medical condition in an email as 1 bit of context. So we want to make sure that if we got rid of that step, you know, like automatically logging somebody in with a magic link, that it was as secure as we could make it. So what was really cool with Customer.io, you can see in this workflow here on the right, we have a time window that says only send this email out on these days between these times. This is after past testing we've done before. And then at the bottom here, you'll see the email one. That's the email actually going out. So what we do is we have a webhook action in Customer.io, which fires off a webhook to one of our APIs, generates a temporary login code for that user, and then we can inject that into the email in real time. So I've seen these in the past where you had to like code it up manually, use a transactional send, and like basically all the onus is on the engineers. We could just do this using an existing API to then inject that code into the email directly. And then we actually flush out the code as soon as the email's sent, so that we're not keeping any record of it in the system. And that logs the user in automatically and expires after 6 hours.
Yeah. What was, Joel, how were you measuring conversions here? Was it, you were obviously trying to get people to log in. Did this campaign have an overall or arching goal that you were kind of marching towards?
Yeah, so we always look at 2 steps in the funnel here. So the first is one that is the user is completely in control of, and that is completing the questionnaire of remaining questions. So that's the one we usually look at in terms of measuring the success of a campaign. Did somebody click the email or SMS and manage to answer all the remaining questions? The next part is around, did they actually apply to the study? So I think off the top of my head, removing that step, I think we saw about a 30% increase in down the funnel as well. So didn't get the full 40% back, but I was pretty happy with that. Result.
Yeah, thanks for talking us through it. It's cool too, because I mean, we're zoomed in on just like a 3-step part of the process: a time window, a webhook that gets the login code, and then one email. But it's cool that, like, I think we zoomed in here because it was a crucial piece of just getting people through that hurdle, that friction point, you know, and then kind of gets them into the next thing. So thanks for sharing more on that.
And I think, like, you know, this is a really specific example as well, but I think the amazing thing for us in this is, like, you try something new, you run this campaign, you get you get like solid analytics on it, and you measure your funnel and you identify a few opportunities. The cool thing with this is it was like, okay, cool, we found a problem. What can we do about it today that we don't need to, like, plan out an entire product spec for, that we don't need to, like, you know, re-architect anything. And because of the webhook functionality in Customer.io, it just allowed us to, like, be like, here's a problem, what can we do about it? Let's fix it, roll it out, done. And I think for us, that was like a really, really awesome experience.
Yeah.
Especially when we're in full hustle mode of, like, how are we going to make revenue in a business?
You got to implement fast. Yeah. Joel, a webhook for somebody who maybe is a traditional email marketer, emails and newsletters might feel, oh, good, I know this world. But when we're throwing out the word webhook, it sometimes can be intimidating of, like, oh my gosh, what's that? For maybe someone who's, you know, growing in technicality in that aspect. What would you say to somebody who's, like, trying to figure out how to use webhooks and what they should do with them?
Yeah, so I'd say if you're not familiar with that term today, like, go and learn. There's plenty of resources available. But you know what I often say to some of my team members who are less technical, I'd say, like, just, like, go buddy up to an engineer and like, go and figure it out together. And don't put the onus on them to do the work for you, but get them on hand to help you figure it out and try it together. Yeah, I think that's always a way to get through some of these concepts.
Mm-hmm. And Elisa, I see, commented in the chat asking about tutorials about triggering emails on specific actions like an abandoned cart. So just speaking to that comment really quick here too, yes, we can follow up with some of those after this, to links to tutorials. We also have a tutorial on webhooks itself. So if that's something that you're looking to get into more, I can definitely link to those to folks after the call here. But Joel, really quick before we get to the next use case, Katya is asking in the chat, can you assign people to accounts, companies in Customer.io? I'm happy to speak on this too, but just wanted to ask you, do you do any kind of that, like, routing or sales rep assignment or routing of things with webhooks that maybe could answer Katya's question a little bit?
We don't do anything of that in Customer.io, but I have seen, like, yeah, I think it'd probably be better to answer that, but I have seen a lot of the logic around, like, we do assign people to cohorts. We do have certain rules. I think any kind of if this then that logic in the workflow builder, like, I've never found a time where I just can't make it happen. So I'm sure it can be done, but I'll pass to you to talk about some specifics.
Yeah, no, thanks for letting me ask you that on the fly. So we actually, Katya, the answer is yes. As Joel said, you pretty much do almost any kind of that if-then logic building. if you actually start a trial or a demo request on the Customer IO site, what we do is we actually take that form submission and we immediately bring it into a Customer IO workflow, and we split it out on a random percentage split. So we have maybe 10 sales reps, and we want to assign a different rep to each trial or demo request that comes in. So that kind of splitting happens. Of course, unabashed plug for Customer IO. If you want to test that out for yourself, go start a trial or demo request, and the person that follows up with you, you'll know that they went through our sales assignment split. So that's one way to kind of see a demo of it yourself if you'd like. But yeah, thanks for the questions, y'all, and keep them coming. For the sake of time, I want to move over to the next use case. So Joel, thanks for talking a little bit about messaging. This next one, I know we've prefaced some stuff about webhooks and different data actions you can do. So in this scenario, I'm hoping you can talk us through it, but I know that you're kind of sending out these daily digest type emails to your clinics. So what was kind of like the scenario that you're needing to accomplish here? And then what kind of data features kind of help to make it possible for you?
Yeah, so in this scenario, so we've talked a lot about the patient experience of people matching to a clinical trial and applying to that clinical trial. On the other side is a clinic who is receiving them to then follow up about the next steps of their screening process. In the example here, we have this event. So this investigator.profile send off, that is a Rudderstack event that has come through to Customer IO. And that basically is our backend saying, hey, this person meets the criteria to notify. There's a few factors that go into that in our system, like preferences and things like that mean we have to do it in our backend currently. Although I think we're going to move away and just do the logic in Customer IO soon for more flexibility. So after that event gets triggered, we again wait for a time window. So these clinics are usually working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So we time the daily digest to go out usually in their morning. But again, like working between the US and Australia, time zones are very different. So time zone is something we always need to factor into everything we do. So we have to wait until this time. Then we send out this match alert, this notification to say you've got more applications. What we found before we use SQL Sync is that the data between what we sent in the event and what was the reality when the email was going out was different. So for example, once the event fires, it may be that the user logs in proactively and reviews all of the applications. Or it might be that between the event fires and the email goes out, another 30 applications came in. So there was always this discrepancy. So what we set up was the SQL Sync from Customer IO, which basically allows us to write a query that goes to our Redshift data warehouse and then syncs the results of that query to the users. And then in the email, instead of relying on the stale data from the event, we can actually inject the fresh data from the SQL query that came in within the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking too, like I recently got I get a prescription medication through the mail. And for a while, there sometimes would be a hang up with insurance or something. And they didn't have an automation that would alert me to that. They actually added that a couple months ago. And I had a situation where something was blocked insurance wise, but I got that daily digest type email that just said, hey, this is one thing waiting for you to approve. Boom, pop in 2 minutes later, everything's back to normal. So as you're telling that story, I'm just thinking through like how, whether somebody in the audience is a marketer owning this type of daily digest process, or Joel, I know you're on the product side, like just beyond just like being able to send out a personalized message, like these messages seem like they're actually linked with good product experience as well. Is that kind of like how you guys are approaching building out these things in such a relevant or time-worthy way?
Yeah, like everything we've talked about today is like pretty core functionality to our product. Like if you don't know about a clinical trial, you can't connect with it. If you don't know about a patient that's coming through, you can't review them. So I think like, yeah, all of these are like pretty core to the experience. So when we look at the optimization, it's not just optimizing our funnel, but actually optimizing that user experience, because we know that the clinics we work with like rely on this email every day and like look forward to the email to see how many new patients they have. So us getting that right is really important for that user experience.
Yeah, I can't help but also notice there at the bottom of the workflow, you have a little test, A/B test set up there. Just in the spirit of testing, could you let us in on maybe what you're testing there or things that you commonly test in Customer IO?
Yeah, always be testing, everyone. Just test everything all the time. So where this is a really, really basic one, literally testing the subject line of action required : versus not action required : so it's a really basic subject line test, but because we're doing them so frequently, yeah, we're just always trying to iterate.
Yeah, I love that. There's a couple different options too for testing in Customer IO. You can kind of split entire workflows if you want to test one whole experience versus another. But what we see here, yeah, basic A/B split on a message.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
on that note, with the split, everyone, I was just going to say, we, when every single user signs up, everyone's assigned a cohort from A to J. So we kind of think about every user, and this is like a random assignment whenever somebody comes in new, and then we use that on some of our bigger changing campaigns that we run.
Yeah, love it. Katya had a follow-up question. It looks like meaning more, okay, a B2B use case. So can you assign customers within the greater account level within, the business use case that you're going for? Katya, I'm happy to follow up too with stuff on that, but just to answer it kind of broadly for the audience as well, the answer is yes. There's some cool ways that you can kind of assign an account ID, and then you can also have people, maybe with the same email address or under the same account ID, and then be able to kind of create batch actions for people within that certain account. So maybe an example that happens frequently is, say you're like a software that does expense reports for companies, and you have one admin, and then you have a bunch of just employees who do their expense report. Customer IO, you can kind of engage all those different user types and kind of save who's the admin, who's not, but then also kind of batch them together and be able to message each company or the users within each company differently. So lots of cool stuff on kind of a B2C or B2B standpoint. We also work with a lot of companies in B2B2C. Joel, I know you have a couple different user types as well, with the clinics and then the actual patients. Is there anything unique there that you have top of mind just on that question of how kind of you organize this one user type versus another? Is it different workspaces, or do you kind of have them all intermixed?
Yeah, so we have 3 different workspaces for our 3 different customer types. So 3 different customer types being the patients on the B2C side, research clinics on our B2B bottoms up side, and then like the sponsor, the pharma companies. So we have those as 3 different workspaces. So there's no interference between the 3 of them.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, and we see these kind of daily digest type emails too a lot in, like, for example, job marketplaces. The company who's posting the job needs a daily update on what all applicants are in. The user themselves who applied wants a daily update on the companies that they're following. So those kind of workflows are all super possible, and also we've seen a highly effective way to keep people kind of like keep that daily active user number or monthly active user number up. Joel, thanks again for kind of walking through and doing a deep dive. I appreciate that. All right. So the last little slide here we have on Customer IO stuff, and I know Mike's going to give a little overview of Rudderstack too as well. Everybody who's commenting in the chat, thanks for all these questions. Joel, you kind of preface this, but when in doubt, test it out. Always be testing. If you want to kind of get into this workflow builder and try building out a workflow, or if you want to test out, can you do some of that assignment, or how do you work with different user types? We have a 14-day trial, so it's risk-free. Get in there, start building. It's a completely functional version of the product. So you can actually, if you're a Rudderstack user, you can plug in Rudderstack, it integrates, and you can have that data flowing in seconds. So one thing I always tell folks, if you're kind of on the fence of like, how does this compare to our tools we're using currently, or what does it do differently? Just get in there, throw in a little bit of data, and you can kind of start to, use the workflow builder and figure out, hey, could I test this versus the onboarding campaign that I'm running currently? Or maybe you just want to start out by triggering Slack alerts to your team members when certain things happen, just to kind of get a feel for the workflow builder. So I definitely recommend getting in there, starting a trial. I'll actually share a little link here for anybody who wants to just easily click through and check things out on our site. Let me just post this in here real quick. But yeah, that's a super simple way to get in and get your hands dirty. I would say too, if you follow that link and you'd rather not start trialing right away, but you actually want us to build out a few of these use cases, like Elisa and Katya, kind of the use cases that you brought to the questions, we're happy to mock those up for you in a demo as well. And we do our demos in kind of a cool way. We have different workspaces for SaaS and product-led growth type use cases. We have a fintech workspace where we can show off kind of like those specific things that people are doing. So let us know when you sign up for that, just what exact stuff you are trying to do or trying to see, and we can get that mocked up for you. So thanks a bunch, y'all. And Joel, thanks for kind of talking through customer rail stuff.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And so now I want to go ahead and spend just a little bit of time talking about Rudderstack and how we work at a very high level. So first off, Rudderstack is a warehouse first CDP. More on that in just a bit. For a little bit of context, we were founded in 2019. As you can see, we work with some amazing venture capital partners. We are a remote first company with teams all over the world, but we are headquartered here in beautiful San Francisco. And as you can see on the right-hand side with the lovely NASCAR slide, we work with some amazing companies today. So building off a little bit of who we are, I wanted to do a quick dive into what does Rudderstack look like under the hood? How does it operate? So first and foremost, there are primarily 3 pipelines for moving data around when you use Rudderstack. First, on the left-hand side, we can see Event Stream. Event Stream is a way to capture behavioral data in real time from a client-side, server-side SDK, and then federate that data in a standardized way to one or more different destinations, be it a data warehouse, marketing automation tool, product analytics, etc. So building off that, we also offer, on the right-hand side, you'll see that ETL solution. So our ETL allows us to pull data from those very same cloud tools that we're using and get that data into a data warehouse. And then building off and completing that story of the vision of your data warehouse being that source of truth and operating as your CDP, we have the reverse ETL. So after I've used the other 2 pipelines to send data where it needs to be, including my data warehouse, the reverse ETL completes that story, taking that single source of truth in my data warehouse and then sending it over to these other cloud tools that you see on the right-hand side. And so those 3 pipelines working in tandem allow us to essentially operationalize your data warehouse and build a CDP on top of it without duplicatively storing your data, which of course has large cost implications as well as security implications. So that's a huge boon for Rudderstack. And then in addition to those 3 pipelines, we also have a set of features that just help throughout capturing data and ensuring it is where it needs to be. The first of those is transformations. So transformations is a programmatic way of altering my data in flight. So some of the ways that customers love to use transformations today include doing things like, let's say I want to remove PII before sending some data to a sensitive system. Or let's say instead I want to call out to a third-party API, and then the return data can then be injected into that event payload so that I have an enriched event payload before sending it off to a tool for activation. Those are some of the common use cases, but in really any business logic that you can think of, we can encapsulate inside of a transformation and apply to any of our pipelines. Building off that, we also offer robust identity stitching. So whether it be joining these 2 discrete profiles from an anonymous user to a known user, and then ensuring that that join happens in downstream tools, we make that really simple to do. We also build off building your own identity graph within your data warehouse. And then lastly, we have a whole suite of data governance features, essentially designed just to increase data fidelity. So on the proactive side, we have things like tracking plans that allow me to prescriptively say, here's the event schema as I want it. Here are the required or optional event parameters. And the net effect is I'm just going to make sure my data is clean. Else, if it doesn't conform to that tracking plan, I can do something like send it to a dead letter queue or just make sure it doesn't pollute downstream data stores. And then on the more reactive side, we have the data governance API itself that just allows me to interrogate my data and see what events am I sending. Do I accidentally have a dozen or so permutations of the same event? And so at a high level, that's how Rudderstack works under the hood. I also want to discuss what next steps look like. So first off, you're more than welcome to start using Rudderstack for free today. Please feel free to visit that URL down below. We'll send this out after our call as well as an email. You can kick the tires, see what we're all about. Beyond that, we also have a great blog that's really centered around use cases that many of our customers and prospects might find useful. Please feel free to check that out. And then lastly, if anything we've discussed on this call today has really piqued your interest, we would love to have a consultative call with you, with our sales team, just to discuss what are some of the challenges you're facing, and does it seem like Rudderstack could help you with any of that? And so that's it in terms of everything that I wanted to discuss on Rudderstack. Now I wanted to open things up for the Q&A, and I will go ahead and just open our chat real quick, and we can start. I see we have a very active audience, so let's just start working through those. Awesome. It looks like everything in the chat. Here we go. And we have a question from Jackie that says, what does your tech stack solution look like? What tools are in it? And how do other tools in the tech stack interact with Customer IO and Rudderstack?
All right, I'm guessing that one's for me.
I believe so.
So yeah, the tech stack that we have with Rudderstack and Customer IO, I'm just going to, as a little prompt, I'm going to bring up the Rudderstack console on my other screen. But yeah, we have everything going in and out of those two tools. Like I cannot express just how central they are to everything. So in terms of data going into Rudderstack, off the top of my head, we have a couple of back-end sources from our different products, front-end sources, again, from different front-end products. We have the Customer IO data streaming in to Rudderstack, and I'm trying to think what else we have off the top of my head. And then streaming out, this is probably where we have even more. So streaming out, we have everything from Rudderstack going into Redshift, our data warehouse, into, again, back into Customer IO. We have Amplitude for our product analytics. We have Facebook Pixel and Facebook, the conversions API, the backend tracking one. We also have it going to Google Analytics, some other tracking pixels, and then out to HubSpot via the reverse ETL, like we talked about earlier. So there's a lot. But yeah, the cool thing is it's usually, if you want to add more, it's a couple of clicks to do it.
Thanks for that. And then we have a question from Gregory. Where is this optimization happening? Is that within Customer IO or elsewhere? This could be things like optimizing for conversion, as mentioned in your example earlier.
Yeah, so it depends on what we're optimizing. So where we started with that, the example I gave before, and looking at that funnel, when I was talking about that funnel, that was a full funnel starting at campaign delivered based on the event streaming from Customer IO to patient being accepted by the clinical research site. That's coming from Amplitude. Sorry, from the Rudderstack event into Amplitude. So when we're looking at that full funnel, we basically, we'll pick those points, and then we started off optimizing things inside Customer IO as opposed to in the product, purely because we could do it easier. We could do it between somebody in the growth team or myself or somebody else on the product team, just getting it and doing it without needing to go through the full process of changing our product.
Awesome. Building off that, can you tell us more about in-app messaging? You mentioned some of your lag time being up to 15 minutes, and I believe Rudderstack has a lag time of approximately 5 minutes. Real quick, for most of the destinations that Rudderstack is sending to, that's going to be real time. Some of the exceptions are going to be for data warehouses, where that is batched in as little as every couple of minutes for our enterprise customers, and otherwise in every 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I think, Gregory, what I was talking about wasn't actually in-app messaging, but I'd say for in-app messaging, so the use case that I was talking about was a daily digest where we rely on the SQL sync. And we could actually make that every 1 minute or 2 minutes if we wanted to. 15 minutes is just enough for that particular use case. But what I'd say is anything that relies on real-time information, you can use the Rudderstack events to trigger that and use the event data. So if I was doing in-app messaging, I would fire an event from my front end or back end, and then use the data in that event to then immediately display the in-app messaging. You wouldn't have a time delay. So there'd be no lag in that case, or maybe like 4 seconds or whatever.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Then from Jackie, how is integrating Rudderstack and customer IO with Redshift? What does it feel like to have a warehouse-centric tech stack?
All right, Jackie. So that was really easy. So basically, we just added Redshift as a destination in Rudderstack, and you just have to connect up all of your sources to it. I remember I think the hardest part was actually creating a dedicated user for Rudderstack and getting the IP whitelisting on our Redshift firewall. That's the only hurdle we came across. The rest of it was all configured in the interface. Syncs up every 30 minutes, I think we have it to. And yeah, all of that data feeds through. So customer IO and any just goes into Rudderstack like any other source. And then all of that data, all that event data gets output to Redshift. I think what does it feel like? It's pretty awesome. I really love that whenever we need to report on something or understand what's really going on in a situation, we can stitch all of that data together from the multiple sources, and because it's all in the warehouse, we can stitch our production user database or to the event data to give it some more color. And combining those two things, looking at your real user database with events, just gives you such a bigger picture.
Right. Then moving on, we have a question from Rachel. Can you talk a little bit about attribution use cases through Rudderstack? I'd be happy to take that one. So first, I think it comes down to how do you want to do attribution? Are you currently using an attribution provider like an AppsFlyer, a branch, an Adjust, what have you? If so, we have integrations with all the big players in attribution. So that should be pretty straightforward. Happy to give a demo, or you're more than welcome to hop into Rudderstack and you can see what that process is like for setting up a source or destination. Very straightforward. In terms of, let's say I'm not using an attribution provider today. I want to actually build out my own attribution model in my data warehouse. I would say that's one place where Rudderstack is super strong. Let's say I want to capture every time a user views something, every time they click, all of those different engagement points. In that event payload, we'll also include any UTM parameters. As part of that payload, you can also include context, like user not only added this to cart, but the context is this item looked like that. So you'll have not only the event, like the view or the click, but then we can also capture any contextual information associated with what they're doing, including the UTM params. All of that data then is fed into our data warehouse in a structured format. Perhaps after this, I can share that default schema for how we send this data. And then once the data exists within my data warehouse, it's simply a question of building out the attribution model that I want. I think dbt would be a great way to do that. So whether it be last click, whether it be MTA or a multi-touch attribution model, those are all things we can do once the data is in the data warehouse in a structured format. Hope that answered your question, Rachel.
And we are currently working on that at the moment. We're using the data in the Rudderstack events to build that attribution model in the warehouse.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
And then go ahead,
Mike.
I think the one question from Henry is kind of related in the same vein, if you were going to that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I can jump in. Can you use Rudderstack event as a custom conversion goal? The answer is yes. So in customer IO, we're talking about attribution. Every campaign you can set whatever conversion goal you want for it. So if you're an e-com company, maybe you're actually trying to drive a purchase. So you could say, did they do a purchase within 1 day after receiving this message? If so, count that as a conversion. You kind of have control there to dial that attribution window up or down. Maybe you're like, one day is too long. I want to attribute it more, 30 minutes after receiving this or 2 hours after receiving a message. So you can kind of scale that way up or way down and kind of test out how you want to attribute campaigns. Joel, do you have anything to add there? What do you typically use as like an attribution window for campaign conversions?
I think we usually use event goals and 48 hours because we're also running a lot of ads on the same kind of audience too.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then how many people on your engineering team did it take to implement these solutions?
So the initial setup, I would say 1.5 engineers over a week, and the half person being the CTO, who just helps here and there. Yeah, so it wasn't long for the initial setup. It wasn't many people. Over time though, like pretty much every engineer has done some work on Rudderstack over the course of the last 18 months.
Cool. And then how much time would you estimate that Rudderstack and customer IO are saving your team?
It's a very tricky question to answer, but I'd say I think from a go-to-market standpoint of like, we want to launch this new thing, I'd say the typical lead time, if you needed to wait for an engineering team, and in our company anyway, would be, unless it was super urgent, it'd probably be a 2-week lead time minimum. So the best thing that we have now is like, we can usually do it in customer IO based on what we've already configured and set and events we're streaming through from Rudderstack on the same day. So I'd say the biggest thing we see is that lead time of when we can actually launch something, going from 2 weeks to one day.
Great. And then let me also pull up, I think there's a dedicated section for questions. I want to make sure I don't skip any there. I guess it's just another rendition of the chat. Awesome. So I think that's it for questions. If there's nothing else, I want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about all of us. And again, Joel, Cody, thank you both so much for taking your time out as well.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Thanks, Joel.